I'll see some differences with the 2011 as well. And we haven't looked too much at our vegetation data yet. It's coming, but we do expect that there probably will be a significant correlation between these densities and the existence of a thick understory or ground cover.
So studying the black-throated blue warbler populations here, I looked back at 2010 and 2011 as well, and we calculated their density on the property, and it was the highest. They were most densely populated on the sanctuary here in 2010, and then the following year, the population decreased, the density decreased slightly the next year. And then when we surveyed, the density decreased a lot, and the only thing I can think to explain the drop in density for this year may be because when we survey birds on our the point count surveys, there's always a chance you're going to double a bird in the wild, so there may have been more doubling in those years, whereas we didn't in this year. And this is a map of the spatial distribution of the warblers that were surveyed this year. And you can see that they occurred all over the property, but they were most occurring up and by that mountain wall. They were up in the corner, the northeast corner there. And that's most likely explained by the nesting habitat there. So we focused on that corner when we banded and nest searched, because that's where they're all going to be. And this year we banded 14 individuals. 8 of them were adults, 6 of them were nestlings. And the nests that we found 6 of them, and 1/3 of them were successful. So 1/3 were abandoned and 1/3 were depredated. But in each nest that was successful, there were 3 nestlings, and that's how we banded our 6 nestlings. So, to conclude, the implications of our data here, based on what's happening at the Bear Paw timberlands, based on the data, we can say that it's possible to maintain wildlife habitat, in our case birds, while harvesting your timber products as well. So it's a balance between making your profits and also sustaining the wildlife populations that inhabit that area. And then the black-throated warblers may be used as an indicator species of complex forest habitat because they are a forest interior species that requires a certain habitat to nest and to sustain their populations. We see that here at 10. So in the future, when they do this project, maybe they can use blues. If they hear them at a certain place in the timberlands, they can say, well, it tells a story about what's happening at that habitat.
So for the future, there is a lot of ongoing data analysis with this project. I'm planning on writing a scholarly paper about this research for my master's. And throughout the next couple of months, I'll be looking at a lot more depth on the sort of statistical analysis side. Specifically, 2 things that I haven't really talked about too much. I'm going to be looking at the differences in the different bird feeding guilds and how that changes between the different cuts. So whether the sort of functional communities are changing with regard to the cut and the uncut forest. And also trying to sort of pinpoint specific vegetation characteristics that do influence which species occur. So to be able to go to forest managers and say, if you're going to cut your land, you want to retain these specific characteristics, because these are the characteristics that bring in the birds, that keep the breeding bird communities there. So Tin Mountain is planning on continuing this project into the future. They've been doing the breeding bird survey here for quite a while, and the one at Bear Paw is pretty well going now. So maybe in the future they will manage to get pre-harvest data for breeding birds if they do any more cuts to compare before and after for managed lands. So that's the end of our project. Thank you very much.
Fabulous. And for our last but not least presentation, Hi everybody, thank you for coming. I hope I can tell you something new about brook trout today, so we'll get started on the brook trout habitat restoration project. So just a little introduction about the eastern brook trout. You can see its life history characteristics here. Typically the fish we're working with are much smaller than what is depicted here. We're working with fish that are anywhere from 0 to 3 years of age, and typically no more than about 8 inches. And an analogous weight, they're fairly small fish. Now, the scientific name of the brook trout, Salvelinus fontinalis, I thought it was interesting to look at the history of the name itself. And I found that brook trout are not technically a trout, they're a char, they're in the salmon family. And the specific epithet, fontinalis, means that these fish are from a spring or fountain, so the name is really indicative of the fish in its habitat. The distribution of the brook trout, it's native to the northeastern United States, Canada, and the Appalachian Mountains. Although it has been introduced throughout the world as a popular sport fish, it has a very high economic value. However, some of these introductions have not been seen as a success story. In western waters of the United States, they're considered a nuisance because they do outcompete native fish species such as cutthroat trout. However, in eastern waters here, there are many threatened populations. I'm from Pennsylvania, and right now the main story in Pennsylvania is Marcellus Shale, and brook trout and Marcellus Shale are not the best of friends. So some of the habitat characteristics of the brook trout. We are focusing on headwater mountain streams with this project. Although they do inhabit streams, ponds, lakes, rivers, pretty much anywhere that they can make a living. They do require cool water. There are cold water species, and they require highly oxygenated water, which is something that you typically find from mountain streams, which have a steep gradient to the stream, where water is able to tumble and churn and add oxygen to the water. They do require neutral to slightly acidic pH conditions, so you won't find brook trout in water with a pH much less than 4.5. They just can't survive there. They're a very sensitive species, so when disturbances happen, such as the building of a dam or a large release of sediment at one time, these fish are negatively impacted most of the time. They require an abundant food source, mainly in the form of macroinvertebrates, and I had a small focus on macroinvertebrates this year, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit here. But these last two topics here, pools and cover, are what we're mainly focusing on through this project. So some reasons for the habitat restoration and why this project really exists. And this was a quote from last year's intern, and I felt that it was appropriate to use it again because he hit it right on the nail. So the Tin Mountain Conservation Center, in partnership with NRCS, has made arrangements with some of the landowners in Carroll County and in New Hampshire to restore some of their local trout streams to a more natural state through the addition of large woody debris. So what does that mean exactly? Basically, we're taking wood and including it into the stream. But why would we do that? Some people think that wood in streams is messy and unattractive. So from habitat and land management, there was a lot of clear cutting, especially back at the turn of the last century. So this is a picture from Pennsylvania in 1920, a field that has been completely clear cut. And this was a story across a large section of the northeast here. So what happens when they clear cut is that typically the forest was completely removed up to a stream riparian zone. That eliminates any possibility of the tree, which was growing next to a stream, to be able to fall into the stream on its own. And that's a problem for brook trout because they do rely on these woody additions. So we were looking to make wood additions on our own, but we had to ask what makes a good trout stream. So through this project, we would select 1,000-foot sections of stream, and we would look at their characteristics. So specifically, we would look at some of the habitat characteristics of the area. So we would do things such as water chemistry analysis, depth, width, gradient, substrate analyses of all these streams to try to get a sense of why this stream might be or might not be a good brook trout stream. We also did wood surveys, and this entailed going through the entire 1,000-foot section and counting all of the wood in that section to determine how much of the stream surface area was comprised of wood. So we used that initial calculation and we tried to increase the surface area of wood in the stream section to 6% coverage. those initial analyses, we had to determine what types of fish, and especially the trout, were in these streams. So we did some electrofishing. And this is just a simple, pretty much the most unbiased sampling method you can do for fish. It produces a low voltage of electricity. You pretty much shock the fish. That's the best way to explain it. They kind of, they feel the electric shock, they tense up, they float, and what you do is you just net the fish, you put them in a bucket, and you weigh and measure them to try to determine what's the length and the weights of each fish, and what are the fish community, or what does the fish community look like in this particular stream. And every once in a while you get some nicer fish like this. And although this was not the typical size of our fish, many of them are maybe half this size. These are some of the biggest fish that we caught, and it's because we're working in small headwater mountain streams. So my tagline through the whole week of electrofishing was, anytime we got a fish this size, that's a nice fish. So the next step was to make wood additions. And we would take a stream, or a section of the stream that was deprived of wood, a section of the stream that we thought could use a wood addition. So we would cut trees down and place them in the stream. And we did this with the hopes that these wood additions would collect water in deepened pools, it would offer brook trout cover, and it would build up sediment, it would trap nutrients in these jams, all things that are very indicative of brook trout habitat. So like I was saying before, my focus this summer was on macroinvertebrates. So I did a macroinvertebrate analysis and inventory of all the potential food sources that these fish have access to. So we used a drift net here to collect all the macroinvertebrates that were floating down the stream channel, basically bringing food to trout. We also used this fallout pan here to collect all the macroinvertebrates that were falling out of the canopy that could potentially fall into the stream and also become a food source for trout. So some of the results of our electrofishing study. This is 7 of our stream sections here, and as you can see, the number of trout in each stream section really, really varies. And it's interesting because some people might think that, all of these smaller mountain streams would hold the exact same number of fish, and that's not the case at all. And the most surprising thing was there's variation even within streams. So if we look at Sanborn Brook here, 2010, 2011 treatments, there's twice as many fish in one section of Sanborn Brook as there was in another. And that surprised me because these are adjacent stream sections. So then I was looking at the average length and the average width of each of these fish, or each of the fish communities in these streams. And surprisingly, most of the average trout lengths were pretty universal. But when you look at the trout weights, they really do have a lot of variation in them. So some of these streams, in particular here, Mason Brook Tributary, and White Lot Brook, had fairly high average trout lengths. But when you look to the average trout weights, they're the lowest 3 streams. So in these streams we have longer, skinnier fish as opposed to a stream like the Sanborn 2010 section that has long and heavy fish. We're also looking at trout density and trout biomass. So trout density is the number of eastern brook trout per 100 square meters of stream. Some of these streams have very high density, some have very low density, and this was just as much of a function of how much water is actually in the stream as it is to the number of fish in the stream. You could have a very small stream with a lot of fish in it, have an extremely high density. You could also have a very large stream with very few fish and have a very low density. And looking at the trout biomass here, we're looking at how much weight of brook trout are there per 100 square meters of stream. And it was interesting to me to see that Sanborn Brook 2010 had very low trout density, but it had the highest trout biomass. So just an interesting thing to note. So this chart here is showing the length versus weight correlation of the 6 stream sections here. And basically, to make a complicated concept more easy to understand, is that these trend lines here represent the length and weight correlations of these 6 stream sections here. So what this graph is depicting is that White Lot Brook, the black dotted line here, had some of the streams are not exactly the same, the fish in the streams are not exactly the same, and they're not growing at the same rate in all of these streams. So now we're going to take a little bit more of an in-depth look at white-lock brook. This is a stream that's very intensely studied here. So white-lock brook, we have 4 sections on this stream. And we have one section in particular of interest to me was the 2010 section. Now this section of stream was treated in 2010 with wood additions and has been left intact since. So if you notice, this stream, or this section of the stream has the most trout in it. That's what I would expect. These wood additions are supposed to be making the stream section more suitable habitat for brook trout. So they're offering these pools and cover that brook trout need. So the fish in that section have had the longest period of time to readjust to these wood additions. Now, as I would also expect, the 2011 section has slightly less fish than the 2010 section because the fish in that section have not had nearly as long of a time to readjust to their habitat restoration. In the 2012 section, we actually just treated this week, so there is still variation in the number of trout in each of these stream sections. And to look at their lengths and weights again, this was one of the most surprising things that I found out of this study, was that the average trout length and the average trout weights, even within a stream section, can vary quite a bit. Especially the White-Lock Brook 2010 section again, it had a very low average trout length, and it had a much greater, much less average trout weight. And I started thinking, why would that be? And I thought maybe for this stream section, there's more small fish surviving there because these fish have had the inclusion of these large woody debris, or this large woody debris, and that's making the trout more able to survive at a younger age. I'm not exactly sure if that's the case, that's just what came to mind when I first saw this graph. And we're also looking at the trout density and biomass in White-Lock Brook. And this is a little bit more indicative of what I would expect it to look like. However, the anomaly here was White-Lock Brook, the 2012 section for both density and biomass. It's much higher than the other streams. If you were asking me to take a bet on which would have the highest density and biomass, I would again say the 2010 section because these fish have been exposed to this treatment for a longer period of time than the others. So again, we're looking at the length and weight correlation of the fish within White-Lock Brook itself. And the fish in this stream are fairly consistent with their length-weight correlation. And I'm sure many of you noticed on the last correlation slide, but up until about 10 centimeters in length, all of the streams or the stream sections contain fish that are about the same weight as well. When you start to find fish that are larger than 10 centimeters, the trend lines here really start to spread out, and that's because one large fish in each of those stream sections can really deviate that trend line and really have a much stronger emphasis than might be indicative of the entire stream. So now we're looking at some of the macroinvertebrate samples that I did. And this was the drift net. And in particular, we had 5 orders of invertebrates here that were much more abundant than the others. And so those would be our stoneflies, mayflies, caddisflies, what we would consider houseflies, and as in the Diptera, you can also include things such as mosquitoes, crane flies in that order, and the Coleoptera, which are the beetles. They're much more abundant than the rest of the orders. So I wanted to plot how their abundance changed over the summer. And as you can see, it seems that most of these orders really declined throughout the summer, or they declined in our detection of them. And basically that's saying to me that as the summer progressed, these fish had less access to food sources. And now looking at the fallout traps, we see that especially Diptera and Lepidoptera, which are the moths and butterflies, they were much more abundant. And these were the insects that were falling out of the canopy into our fallout traps. So again, I wanted to plot the abundance of these orders through the summer. And I was looking at these 3 orders in particular, and it was the same trend as the drift nets. The abundance of these orders really declined throughout the summer. So again, these trout are having less access to terrestrial fallout than they did earlier in the summer here. So looking into the future, this project will continue to go on. I believe several more miles of stream have been approved to be treated with these large wood additions next year. So we're going to be taking a lot more of these stream sections that look like this. There's a large section of stream right here with no wood additions, and we're putting wood into them. And I know this may look rather dramatic, but this tree is a fresh cut. We just did this past week, so it still has the vegetation, or it's still retaining its vegetation. So pretty soon when the needles of this hemlock fall off, this tree is going to look much more like a natural wood addition should. And hopefully with these wood additions, we're going to be seeing more brook trout, larger brook trout, and you know, if you were electrofishing with me this week, that's a nice fish. But wood additions are also important to a lot of other species besides brook trout. This is a warm water species here, and they rely on large wood additions just as much as brook trout do. Even things that are other than fish. So we have a salamander here that we caught while we were electrofishing. These guys depend on woody additions too for, again, cover and food sources and all these things that a natural wood addition would provide. We also had many things like amphibians. We had a lot of macroinvertebrates that rely on these wood additions. So basically, as long as we're putting wood into streams that need them, we're improving the habitat, as long as you do it in the right way, so take that with a grain of salt. But I just wanted to say thank you to Dr. Michael Klein, the Executive Director here at Tin Mountain, and Dick Fortin, the Brook Trout Project Manager. We worked pretty hard this summer to do this, and thank you to the rest of the Tin Mountain staff for having me and putting on the Eco Forum, and thank you to the Tin Mountain